Hello and welcome to this fourth episode of the Memoirs of a Fellow Traveller, in which I share reflections, memories, and my experiences in life, and reflections based on what I now have learned about and come to understand as some fundamental cosmic laws governing the way things happen and the process that we need to go through in order to, and the steps and stages of that process in order to become fully human as we were created to be, which is a divine human beings, really. Looking back at, and I'm going to pick up my story from still when I was in Saibai in South Thailand as a missionary doctor. Um, and looking back on that period of time, the first two terms of 4 years, totaling, in fact, it was 9 years if you add the year in between when we were back in the UK, I have lots of mixed feelings. And there's no doubt in my mind that we had some genuine experiences of the transcendent dimension of reality, which we don't see, but that occasionally turns up and shows up in our lives, quite often without necessarily asking for them. But also, the fact that if you engage in spiritual practices of any kind with the intention of becoming more fully present to yourself, to each other, to others, and to God, then you open the way, you open the door. The way you interpret those experiences is a different matter, and as I've said before, it depends on where you are in terms of your stages and level of spiritual intelligence, of growth in its spiritual intelligence and understanding. So, just to say, for example, it wasn't just us missionaries who were having these experiences, it was definitely the Thai people as well. And it is what convinced them of the reality of what we were introducing to them to through by introducing them to the good news of Jesus Christ, come to set us free from the bondage of slavery to what we, in sort of religious terms, is called sin, but it's actually ego passions and all that. To illustrate that point, I'd like to tell the story of something that happened, which we weren't actually present for, but the the Thai, the small group of Thai Christians often used to meet for a, a dawn prayer meeting as the sun was rising, usually around somewhere around 6 o'clock, because it's fairly consistent in the tropics. And so they would go to the beach and either gather in a circle or sometimes facing the sun and simply be praying about all sorts of things, but often starting very much with a sort of sense of thanksgiving, gratitude, praise for life, for what they're experiencing, for nature, for each other, and the community that they were in. And then often turning their thoughts to prayers for others and the nation. We sometimes did that actually at night time. We very occasionally, about once a quarter, we had an all-night prayer meeting, which we went into great depths and praying for the nation and for the community and for, you know, God's kingdom to manifest on earth. Anyway, that's another story. But so on this particular morning, they rushed back to us. I was on duty, and we were having, I think it was having breakfast, and they came and reported what they'd experienced at the beach, which was, whilst they were praying, they heard the crunch, crunch, crunch of footsteps in the sand coming up behind them. They didn't take any notice because they assumed it was one of us joining them. Carried on praying and not focusing, not being diverted from that. And then, but they said they experienced a warmth that was stronger than the warmth of the heat of the rising sun that was coming up from the east, and yet the footsteps were standing behind them, and then the footsteps moved round to the front, and thereupon they also felt a heat that was stronger than the sun even. And they opened their eyes and saw no one. The beach was empty apart from themselves, and there were no new footsteps in the sand at all. So they were very excited by this because they really felt that they had experienced, if you like, the presence of the one that is in the Old Testament called the angel of the Lord, simply meaning the messenger, the one that sort of communicates in human form. And of course, from the point of view of Christians, it's the presence of the risen Christ that they were sort of linking with experience to. So anyway, that's just one example of something that helped enliven their experience. Well, the government, in our second term, the government had built, was building and completed another small government-run hospital in the town, on the other side of town, and this was manned by fairly inexperienced doctors who'd come down from their medical training in Bangkok, and their interest was not so much in the local community. They wanted to get out of this rather lonely and isolated and backward place as quickly as possible and get back to practicing medicine in the big cities where they could probably make a lot more money, because even as government doctors they had to have their own private clinics to make any decent income. So they didn't bother to learn the local language, and the hospital wasn't that popular with the local population, especially the Malay, although they had completely free treatment, I think, there. However, our treatment was not free, but on the other hand, it was on a, what you can afford basis. However, subsequently, a doctor was sent down from Bangkok, who appointed to one of the two doctors there, who had become a Christian already, and I got to know him. And he did his ward rounds just like I did, twice a day, and he tried to learn the local dialect of Malay. Seriously. And so I think things began to change in that hospital. Began to become the patient number certainly went up when he was there. And I remember I met him quite regularly, and we used to share news information and stuff. And I met him one day. It was on I think a Saturday morning, and he was looking completely drained and white and pale, I should say. And I said, "What's been happening? You look very tired." And he said, "Well, he'd been up all night, having to remove a uterus, because the uterus wouldn't stop bleeding, and after birth, and again they didn't have a blood bank either, and the situation was getting pretty bad." Well, amazingly, he said he did have the ability to test for blood groups, but they didn't have a blood bank. And he discovered that the woman's blood group was the same as his. So he gave a pint of his own blood and then stood up and did the operation. So no wonder he was looking rather pale. But I tell that story because here was somebody who was another Thai Christian, become a Christian through a church in Bangkok that had been a Thai-led congregation. And he showed certainly that the character of value, the love and compassion that you would expect from a follower of Jesus. And so that was just somebody who had obviously was beginning to grow in his Christian faith as a follower of Jesus Christ. And what I mention that because people are all sorts of different levels of spiritual growth and maturity. We all have to grow, and we all have to start from a certain starting point, and there are different starting points. It was not until many, many years later that I discovered these same qualities of love and compassion in a genuine Thai Buddhist. I can't include that story here, so it wouldn't be the right moment. Well, towards the end of our second tour out there, I mean, each tour was 4 years, and then we had a year in between. So towards the end of our second term, which would have been about in our ninth year or so, my wife and I began to wonder whether or not we should find an opportunity to serve God in Thailand in a different context, in a different situation. And the reason for that, well, there were two reasons really. One is that the Overseas Missionary Fellowship was an interdenominational mission whose policy was to not set up a denomination, but to work in collaboration with whatever denomination was in the area, and then hand things over to them. Well, in this situation we were in, they seemed to be setting up a network of Overseas Missionary Fellowship congregations that was becoming a little bit like its own denomination. There were other denominations, not immediately in the area, but sort of in the south of Thailand, Presbyterians and Baptists, for example. And so what happened, therefore, is that these congregations, in our situation, were still being led by foreigners, and I felt at the time it really was well past the time when we should be, as foreign missionaries, working under national leadership. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was really the attitude of the mission towards the whole sort of experience of being filled with the Spirit and spiritual gifts and all the rest of it. Now, admittedly, there was a particular understanding which of how to be filled with the Spirit, which involves speaking in tongues. Now, I didn't take a particularly hardline view on this at all. I had a sort of open-minded view of how, but anyway, it was just, well, things were sort of taken out of our hands really, because a conference, we had a church conference for the Thai church every year in the three provinces in South Thailand, and we invited a national Thai church leader, speaker person to address these. And that year we had invited somebody called Dr. Grieng Sak, Dr. Grieng Sak Mong Sak. He was a lecturer in the Agricultural University in Bangkok, although his actual subject was statistics, and he had got a PhD in statistics from Australia, where he had become a Christian. And he was quite a charismatic personality, and he had started this church in Bangkok, which was a sort of growing quite fast, very small at that time still. But anyway, after one of his talks, he invited people who wanted to be prayed for healing, and he believed in prayer for healing, to come forward and be prayed for. But at the same time, he also issued an invitation for anybody who would like to be filled with the Spirit, have a sort of experience of Pentecost for themselves rather than just knowing about it in their head, to form another group and be prayed for. And he invited myself and a few others to pray for this group. Now, you've got to imagine the situation where we were meeting in a school hall. There were about 200 or so delegates or participants, shall we say, and the hall was open. There were no walls. It was just a roof on pillars with a stage. And around the outside, a whole group of people from Sidebury town were sort of observing what was going on with curiosity. And so as I started to pray for this group of people, lo and behold, they began to praise God in certainly not Thai or Southern Thai or any dialect of Thai that I knew, or Malay, but in other languages. And it all came pouring out of them, just like it had done when I was experiencing this in the first place, instance. And it spread, therefore, to the whole 200 people there, and it was quite a commotion, really. An orderly commotion, but it was very definitely something happening. And so that was the setting the cat among the pigeons. And after that, there was a debate and discussion went on amongst the missionary circles. And it was very clear that we had to sort of rein back on this stuff. So that was the other reason. So when Dr. Griengsak invited myself, in fact, he invited two other couples from the South Thailand to join him and become part of his staff in Bangkok. Carol and I felt that was the next thing to do. So that's why we were moved up to Bangkok. And I will continue the story in the next slide. Before taking up his offer, we were due another furlough, as they called it, a time back in the UK, and we took the opportunity to do some training with a church in South London doing that ran training courses for people who are working in the inner city, and Bangkok being so different from the rural area we were in. We did some training there. It was a very good time, but I'm not going to be talking much about the Ichthus Christian Fellowship year. In point of fact, nothing could have really prepared us for what we experienced in the Hope of Bangkok Church. So anyway, the photograph on the left-hand side, the top left corner, is what was taken on the top of one of the towers of the suspension bridge over the river Chao Phraya in Bangkok. And behind me in the background is the district for which I was given responsibility by Dr. Grieng Sak. I was to be a leader, the district leader, well, actually a co-leader. Carol and I together were co-leaders with another Thai person, lady, who we worked with. The top of the tower I was able to access it because I knew the engineer who was in charge of the whole project, and he allowed me up there before the bridge was actually completed. So by the time we started working there, the church in Bangkok had grown to about 800 strong, and a lot of the members were young people, a lot of them professional young people indeed, or at least educated. Very different indeed from the kind of people that we were working with in the south of Thailand. Because the church had grown so strong and large, they had hired this cinema complex in the center of Bangkok, which is where they set up their offices and met, and they used the auditorium for their meetings, cinema auditorium, and then the lots and lots of rooms which we used for other activities. It was a rather incredible time. Let me just explain that on a Sunday morning, for example, we were up at about we started our early morning prayer meeting at the church at 5:30 a.m. We had then breakfast and then began the activities, which were all sorts of clubs that were put on by different members of the staff or volunteers who had different areas of expertise. So Carol, for example, taught English. I did something to do with health. In fact, they had a clinic as well. And myself and another Thai doctor, we were expected to man the clinic. And then they had computer clubs and all sorts of things. They were into modern IT. They were very early on in that and ahead of the game. And so when people came up the stairs, I remember somebody saying to me, am I in IBM or am I in a church? It kind of had the feel of a big business, which is hardly surprising because Dr. Grieng Sak was in fact a very astute business person, and he was a Thai Chinese. And the Chinese are the business people of Thailand. The Thai themselves love to do the civil service jobs, and they actually exist in a very kind of good mutual cooperative relationship together. So anyway, we started at that time. We ran. There was a service of sort of main worship service started at 10 o'clock. This was followed by lunch together in our districts, which was followed by activities in our districts, and then we had another service at 4 o'clock, lasted through till 6 o'clock, and then everybody else left, and all the leadership teams, all the group of leaders, so district leaders with their sub-district leaders, met with Grieng Sak, and we had sort of planning meetings and all. It went on till about midnight. Well, we got back home at about midnight. And the next day, which was supposed to be our day off, we were expected to turn up at Grieng Sak's house for his own sort of personal instruction for the leaders, which he called David's Mighty Men. Wow, that was quite something. The photograph at the top left-hand side is I'm standing up addressing a group of the church leaders, you'll see some missionaries there as well. Now, that's because he was quite clever at inviting and getting on board people who he felt had certain gifts to offer. And there was the on the right hand side, you'll see a number of expat faces, but then there was a green sack as well, far right. Um, the church also had its own Bible school, and I was invited to do some teaching at the Bible school. And again, so I took part in that, and that's a photograph of the graduate ceremony at the end of in 1987. Our home in the Yatnawa district of Bangkok became the hub for the outreach program of the whole district. Um, I can't see a photograph of my co-leader there, Rose, um, but to the top right-hand side, you'll see the sub-district leaders and then we had lots of cell groups. So basically, the church grew through a process of what they call cell division and growth, a very organic way of growing the church. And basically, because in each cell you got therefore very sort of good friendships and relationships, and people invited their friends, they came along. And so that's where the growth really took place. Now, what was very interesting for me was that for the first time, I began to understand and began to function really properly within a Thai stroke Thai Chinese kind of cultural setup. Whilst we were doing our training with the Eclipse Christian Fellowship in Southeast London, um, Jonathan was at the local primary school finishing off his final year in primary, and our Rachel, being older, was the boarding school that seemed to be most appropriate for her was a girls' boarding school, a very small but a lovely boarding school down in Yeovil. Um, and so she went there whilst as a boarder because we knew that subsequently we'd be going out to Thailand again. And when we did, Julian, our youngest, went back to Chifu for a short while, for at least I think it was a year, before he started at Dean Close School, which is where Jonathan had gone. Now, the reason Jonathan went there was a number of his friends from Chifu went there, and the mission sort of there was no provision of secondary education in the Far East, and we couldn't afford the fees of an expensive international school. But we managed to get a bursary as missionaries, parents, for Dean Close School, which is an evangelical Christian foundation as well. So my parents then moved to Cheltenham from Beckenham, where they had retired, to be with to be close to the grandchildren. And of course, it was just Jonathan in the end, although Yeovil wasn't too far away. So these photographs were taken during a visit, I think one of our visits back to see them. Julian isn't in that photograph because I think that was when he was still at Shifu. I can't remember. But the home that my parents had bought was actually in a council housing estate. Margaret Thatcher's, of course, allowed owners to to purchase their properties, and so. But it's typical of my father buying somewhere not in a salubrious part of Cheltenham at all, and not even with adequate accommodation to fit our whole family when we came back to visit. So I think Rachel, when she was on school holidays, had to board with the next door neighbours who had a spare room. It was an odd arrangement. But the whole question of secondary education and what we did about our children's secondary education is again one that is I have mixed feelings about now. And Carol, although she was very happy to accompany me and be part of the Hope of Bangkok work that we were doing, felt very uncomfortable about leaving our children back in the UK and sending them to boarding school. It was one, obviously, that given my background, I was used to. and it was sort of considered to be the done thing in my father's situation as well. So he very kindly, obviously, helped us with the fees as well. As so, anyway, I now have mixed feelings about all of this because I can see that boarding school is not really the best setup for children. But at the time, we didn't really, aside from just giving up on Thailand, we had no other alternatives. Um, so the children came out to visit us for the Christmas holidays, and we went back to the UK for the summer holidays. The run up to Christmas at Hope of Bangkok Church was extremely busy, as one would expect. They made much of the opportunity of Christmas because by then Thai society was very aware of Christmas and celebrating it in a thoroughly commercial fashion. Nothing to do with Jesus Christ, of course. But Christmas Eve, well, the whole of our house was full of people staying. So our family just slept in one room upstairs. And on Christmas Eve, there was carol singing round the whole of Bangkok. Well, the whole of our district, rather, not the whole of Bangkok. And we used to go from house to house, not only to members' houses, by the way, not to anybody else. But the carol singing went on all night. And so 5 o'clock in the morning, we arrived back exhausted. And, Carol had stayed behind, obviously, to be with the children. But when I arrived back, it was time for the children and the family to wake up and open their Christmas presents. And then we took them off to the British Club in Bangkok for their Christmas dinner. We were members of the British Club, which is a place of recreation and rest for us, and very much needed in the busy life that we were leading. Then after Christmas, we always had a week or so with a holiday. The first, I think, of the photographs here is of Got Samet off southeastern seaboard beyond Rayong, and then Ganjanapuri is the second photograph, which you see now, us hugging a tree, showing how big the tree was in the national park. Ganjanapuri is where the famous railway that was built by the prisoners of war during the Japanese War, during the Second World War, is. Well, aside from leading a district and all the cell group activity that was happening and the growth that was happening, mostly amongst young people in our district, Dr. Kriengsup asked myself and Carol, and also another couple, again the son of the Central Department Store and his wife, Gob Chai Nui, their names were, to head up what they called a professionals cell group. So this was aimed at reaching the top strata of society in Thailand. I mean, we were working with the son of a rear admiral and the daughter of one of the ex-prime minister of Thailand, who actually fell in love and got married, and at the wedding, the royalty attended it. So you can see that we were in a completely different situation from working with rural poor in the south of Thailand. And indeed, this network of cells began to grow as well. However, there were some problems which I'm going to be talking about in the next, just a little bit later. Well, what was the secret of the remarkable growth of the Hope of Bangkok Church? Was it spiritual factors? Cultural factors? There were probably many factors, but one of them undoubtedly was the fact that it completely fitted in with the whole way in which Thai society is structured and operates. And for me, it was that experience of being immersed in something that was very much more Thai. Perhaps Thai Chinese would be a better description of it. The Thai Chinese are the entrepreneurs in Thailand, and the real genuine Thai people who were born and bred and their ancestors are Thai, are the ideal civil servants. And so actually there was quite a good sort of marriage, if you like, between these two very different preferences. And the Thai government and the civil servants were very happy for the Thai business, the Thai Chinese to enhance the economy of the country through their entrepreneurship. And in a sense, that was also happening in the Hope of Bangkok because, as I said, it functioned like an extremely efficient business as well. But the cultural factor was probably the most important, and that is that you've got to understand the whole of Thai society is like one great big giant pyramid with the king at the head. In fact, the king is called Prajau Yuhua, which means the divine being, the God, at the head. And so within that gigantic pyramid, there are multiple interlacing other smaller pyramids. And each of the pyramids consists of a patron who is, and his or her clientele. I say his or her because Thai society itself is very open to a degree of female leadership, probably more so than the Chinese, as from what I observed anyway. But the point is that the patron has assets of some kind or other. Now, those assets need not be financial assets. Charisma was an important asset. Connections to other to people higher up the chain were assets. Knowledge was an asset, and so the clientele would benefit, and in exchange for the goodness of the patron in offering what he knew or what his assets and sharing them with his clientele, it was expected that in turn they would offer allegiance and support for the patron. And so that's the situation in which I found myself. These pyramid structures were never set in stone. There was a degree of movement and fluidity all the time as people changed their allegiances, basically, and all sorts of reasons for that. So that's, I think, one of so that I became a Thai patron by virtue of my being a client of Griengsak and my connection with him, and he in turn, by his connections with those in high places, in very high up places in the Thai society in Bangkok. So the district of which I was in charge grew very easily because my sub-district leaders and then the cell group leaders were all my clientele, if you like. And of course, it also grew through the fact that, I mean, what they were offering was something that had a sort of vibrancy about it, life. There was an energy, there was knowledge, understanding. There was all sorts of benefits from being part of this extraordinary church. Quite aside from the overtly spiritual aspects of that. And so I did very little, but the district grew. So I'm going to leave the rest of the story to the next little video clip that I'm going to create. The fact that the growth of the Hope of Bangkok Church was at least in part due to the way in which it's functioned as a pyramid structure within the greater structure of the Thai whole of Thai society with the king at the top was further confirmed by some research that an anthropologist was doing at the time, and I got to know him, and he had looked back into the history of the church in Thailand and discovered that there was an initial very fast growth of the church in the north of what was then Siam rather than Thailand. It was called Siam. At the end of the 19th century, at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and it was the result of a man called Daniel McGilvery, who was an American Presbyterian missionary and a medical person himself. Um, and he had started off in Bangkok, and because of his medical skills, the king of Siam at the time had got to know him and requested his services from time to time. And he was then, the king encouraged him, or I don't know if he encouraged him or sent him, but the king wanted him to go up to the north of Siam, which at the time was governed by a whole lot of princes, or there were lots of different princedoms, and the king, the Siam wasn't really a united country in the way that Thailand is today, and so basically McGilvery then functioned as a Thai patron under the patronage of the king himself. And very quickly, a group of his own clientele developed, and they were the emerging church leaders in the north of North Thailand, as we call it now. And the numbers grew exponentially. And the reason for that was they had direct access to the patron. Now, this is one of the key things about the pyramid and the way it works. You have to have that direct access, and it all works through personal connection. Everything in Thailand, actually, not through any formal structures. So anyway, there we are. To illustrate this point, I mean, the very first Christian wedding that took place was forbidden by the local prince in Chiang Mai. It was in Chiang Mai. And the king was able, well, through Daniel McGilvery, who approached the king about asking permission for this wedding, the wedding went ahead because the king was able to override the local princedom. Not sure that did Daniel McGilvery any favors with the local princes. But anyway, what happened then was that the Presbyterian Missionary Society, from North American Presbyterian Mission, began to take notice of what was happening and said, we better send a team of missionaries out there to help Daniel. And when they did, they set up the sort of usual Western style mission structures. And all of a sudden, Daniel lost his immediate connection, or rather his clientele lost their immediate connection with Daniel. And the whole thing fizzled out as a result. And sadly, missionary societies hadn't learnt their lessons, even right the way through to the Overseas Missionary Fellowship, really, which I was part of. It's only when I became a member of Hope of Bangkok Church that I began to function in this way. But sadly, there were lots and lots of other problems, which meant that, as I've explained, we felt we had to leave. Despite the fact that the growth of the church was remarkable, and despite the fact that individuals with whom for whom we were having, if you like, pastoral responsibility, were coming to what I felt was a genuine faith, and their lives were being touched, transformed in many different ways. There were a few things that began to happen that made me increasingly uncomfortable about the whole way that this was developing. So, for example, I mean, the church had this magnificent goal of a church in every district in Thailand. I mean, a hope church in every district in Thailand by the year 2000. And this was back in 1988, 89 by the time. So that would have been quite a lot of churches. And therefore, there was quite an emphasis on achieving results, growth. Is a bit like a business indeed. So every quarter, the Greetings Hut would give us the goals for the next quarter in terms of cell group numbers. Well, not membership, but just the numbers of cell groups, particularly because it was all through the cell groups that the actual growth of people happened. And I would never pass these on. Neither myself nor my co-leader would pass these on to our sub-district leaders and the cell group leaders, because we felt that what we wanted was for them to think about their own the possibilities that they could see and come up with their own goals. And they did that. And because we operated in that way, we consistently managed to achieve our goals. And it was sort of on a Sunday evening at the big meeting when we were all the leaders were together, we were praised for doing so. But after one quarter, when we'd already just doubled our cell group numbers in that quarter, we were told we needed to double them again in 3 months, the next quarter. And I knew that that'd be impossible because you've got to train new leadership for each of these groups. There's no way we could do that. They're all very new and quite inexperienced Christians for the most part, even the cell group leaders. So I did the usual thing, and we came up with a sort of modified, we felt was a reasonable goal for the next quarter, and I submitted that. But a couple of weeks later, at our Sunday evening meeting, for all the leaders, Gringsak called my sub-district leaders up, and those of my friend Gob Chai and Nui up, and he basically said, look, some of the district leaders have got less faith than their sub-district leaders, and my sub-district leaders were asked what faith they had, what goals they had, what they believed they could achieve, and all the rest of it. And they came up with an inflated figure, which I discovered later they had been told by Gringsak or his assistant pastor, I don't know which, to come up with. And that's the way the pyramid works. The one at the top actually can get bypass the lower one, which is me. And so they came up to me after and said, Ken, what are we going to do about this? Ajahn, they called me teacher, Ajahn. What are we going to do about this? I said, well, I don't know, but I'll support you best way I can, and we'll see what we can do. But that I began to really question, what's going on here? And there were other things that made me uncomfortable too, because we were required to swear allegiance to Gringsak in such a way that I felt not comfortable giving it to a human person. My allegiance was to the Christ, and when I say the Christ, yes, the Jesus that I'd come to know through my experiences and through Scripture, but it was actually far more than just the historical person of Jesus. It's the cosmic Christ. I won't go into that now, but anyway, at the time, I felt uncomfortable about this allegiance matter. And then noticing the fact that so much of the members' lives were controlled. I mean, there was a very tight sense of community, all right, but you didn't have the freedom to make your own choices in some matters, such as, for example, marriage, and where you worked and lived and things like that. So I didn't like that at all, and I felt that we were moving towards a cult, that Gringsak was becoming the leader of a cult. He had the charisma, he had the academic expertise and all the rest of it, but it wasn't right. And so a few of us missionaries began to feel the same way, particularly the ones who had moved to Hopa Bangkok Church from the Overseas Missionary Fellowship, and another missionary from another missionary society too. And we confronted Dr. Gringsak one day with this, that our sort of list of symptoms, if you like, that made us feel as though we're going in the direction of becoming a cult rather than a church. He just answered and said, well, not everything that has four legs is a dog. Meaning that just because I've got you found these sort of features in Hopa Bangkok doesn't mean to say we're a cult. Anyway, things came to a head after we'd been back for our summer holiday in 1989. Was it 88? No, 1988. Sometime in the summer in 1988. When we came back, we were asked by the Department of Labour, and I had to attend an interview because they gave me my work permit, and the Hopa Bangkok Church by then was a recognised charitable foundation, and so we had to be answerable to the authorities for what we were doing. And I thankfully was able to say, well, I've just come back from overseas. I don't have the statistics to mind, and I'd have to come back to you later with that. But I realised the writing was on the wall because I couldn't lie to them and produce artificial statistics, which is, I'm sure, what I would be required by Gringsak to do. And so at that point, we felt we just had to leave, and it gave us an excuse with the my co-leader and the sub-district leaders to explain why we felt we had to leave without creating a split, if you like. Um, Although subsequently, it wasn't too many years after that that the church itself, that the Thai people themselves within the congregation, some of them, particularly Gob Chai and Nui and several others, felt uncomfortable about what was happening, and therefore the church split into fragments a little bit. It's still going, but in under different leadership. And Griengsak left, and in fact, he stood for election as the governor of Bangkok. He wasn't elected, but he's got thoroughly involved in politics. He was a fairly sort of power-seeking person, I felt, looking back on it. And Jesus is not into creating kingdoms like that. Anyway, we had to say goodbye. So we had to say farewell to our district, and my co-leader Rose, wearing the yellow blouse to my right, Carol to my left, and her and the friend Pim, and other members of the district, our cell group leaders and sub-district leaders. So we had to go back to the UK for a short period to make alternative arrangements, and in fact, I had already been invited by the principal of Bangkok Bible College, which is now Bangkok Theological Seminary, a man called T. Rat, and he wanted me to work at Bangkok Bible College and start setting up a lay training institute within the connected to the college that would do distance learning and stuff. So, because I had already got this diploma of biblical studies and missiological studies, I was invited to do that. So we came back in 1980. Well, we left Hobart Bangkok 1988 and came back shortly afterwards, the latter part of 88, and then spent the next probably only about 6 or 7 months working in that situation and working with and being part of another network of Thai churches under Thai leadership, but very different from the Hobart Bangkok. So, but the whole project was cut short because my father, who already had a malignant melanoma removed from his leg and then a leg amputation, and he was terminally ill, and we got notification from the hospice where he actually had been moved to that he may not last very long, so we had to rush back to the UK. In fact, he survived another 9 months, but that was another, what happened then was that T. Rupp, the principal, said, "I think, Ken, it's about time you did your theological degree." So that gave me something to aim for when I went back to the UK. Well, that brings me to the end of the fourth episode of the Memoirs of a Fellow Traveller. I haven't throughout this time. I was still operating, still in the first half, if you like, of this phase of development and growth in spiritual intelligence, having had all these amazing experiences, but still very much with a sort of mindset or way of thinking that was somewhat governed by this ethnocentric view of reality and my sort of adult perception of myself as a church planter, church leader type person. I don't know. Anyway, that was a persona rather than the genuine article, which I feel I've discovered much later in life.